Kayla Walsh. She is a former co-host of the 700 Club. She's currently a writer, but she wrote an article reflecting on some time while she was on that show. She writes, "Our paradigm of what a Christian life is supposed to be hugely affects whether we become bitter or not. So many of the people I work with are dealing with disappointment. Disappointment with themselves, and I'm sure disappointment with other people, and disappointment with God, because God doesn't always do what we think God will do. I got one of my most interesting letters at the 700 Club from a young woman in her mid-20s. She had cancer and MS. She said, 'Sometimes I watch your program and I'm helped. But there are other times when I watch your program, I want to take my shoe off and throw it at the television.' I was so fascinated by her honesty that I felt compelled to call her, and we became friends. She said one day, 'One of the things that I really hate about what you do is that you always present people whose marriages get better in 10 minutes, people who always get healed, and people who have the nice packaged answers. I mean, what about the people like me, the people who are dying and still love God? What about the people who take very few steps, but every step leaves a big impression in the snow because it costs every ounce of strength that they have left?' She reflected, 'This woman changed my perspective. Christianity is not this nice, everything is gonna work out okay attitude. I mean, when you think about Christ at the tomb of Lazarus, he wept because it wasn't supposed to be like this. I mean, he had spoken this beautiful world into existence, and it's broken. And there are things in this world that's really messed up. I think one of the greatest gifts that we can give is just a dose of reality that life sometimes down here is disappointing, that God doesn't always answer us, at least like we like, but God is always with us, giving us God. I mean, we live in this broken world. Things can be messed up, but we like to feel good. We like to hear things that are good. We like to paint really good pictures. And if we had to be honest, that's what complicates days like today. Mother's Day and Father's Day for pastors can be a challenging day because many people bring many things to the table when we consider our parents. So we have to make a decision. Do we just preach about the good? And how does that work for people who are struggling with things that just really aren't that good? What happens for those who have daddy issues, be it biological, heavenly, or the desire to be? I remember the day well. The year was 1990. It was a summer day. We were at my dad's apartment. It used to be my entire family's apartment. But we're there. I still remember the address, 912J North Wendover Road. We're in the living room that day. My father calls us in, myself and my two sisters. My oldest sister is about 15, I'm about 10. My baby sister's about 3. And we sit down ready. I don't really know what we're ready for. We never had family meetings. I have no idea what this is. What are we doing? But he says, "Hey, so your mom and I will no longer be married." What does that mean? We've been living in separate places for 3 years. What do you mean you're going to no longer be married? What does that mean? And what's going to change? Because, see, I stayed at the same school, so I had the privilege of seeing both of my parents most days. But then he said this word, divorce. Remember, I'm 10. I kind of understand, but not really. And many of my parents, the parents of my friends, they were not divorced. As time went on, it got real. I started understanding a little more. I no longer saw them both every day as I once did. And if I had to be honest, this was the beginning of my daddy issues. To know that my father would no longer try to work things out with my mother, yeah, I struggled with that. I had stumbled in life up until that point, but this time I was stuck. I was also mad at my heavenly Father because remember, God can do all things. Why wouldn't he fix this? It was just the beginning. And if I had to be honest, I had mama issues too, but that's not today's sermon. For many in the room today, this text that was just read is a familiar one. It's usually told about the prodigal son, you know, the one that takes his inheritance early, blows it on things that can't even prosper him. He ends up with nothing. No money, no food, no companionship. He realizes that even my father's servants live a better life than this. So he goes home. He thinks at least I can be a servant. But his father welcomes him with open arms and throws a party. A party that the older brother did not just disapprove of, but didn't even attend. I've heard many preachers preach about the brother, and they've called him things like jealous, self-righteous, self-absorbed, proud, and unforgiving. Hey, maybe all of that's true, but look at it from his perspective. Didn't this brother have a right to be furious? I mean, who could really blame him? Haven't we stayed home from a party or two because we didn't like the way that some situation panned out? And if we're honest, wasn't it probably less than what this brother had to deal with? The oldest brother has a legitimate right, every human right to be bothered, to be annoyed, to be frustrated. After all, he stayed home, he did the work, he cared for the aging, and had parents that seemed unappreciative while the kid brother goes off and lives this fantasy lifestyle. One that only the older brother could imagine. He was obedient, he was responsible, he fulfilled every expectation while his kid brother could break the rules. It proves the old adage, the nice guy finished last. I mean, really, wouldn't you have daddy issues too? The older brother is hurt, he's disappointed. Sometimes it's hard to bounce back from disappointment. If we're honest in the room, we've all been disappointed. We've been the reason that others have been disappointed as well, including God. I mean, how many can say that you've never wondered or struggled with something that God did or didn't do? I mean, if I'm honest, how many times have I been confident that God is telling me to do something, to say something, to go somewhere? And I believe with every fiber of my being that it's God who's saying it, and I consciously do the opposite. This happens more times than I'd like to admit, so much so that we could rename this sermon Pia's Issues, but that's not where we are today. We know the commandments. Love our God with all our heart, mind, and strength. Love our neighbors as ourselves. But how many times have we failed? Not just the first one, but the second one as well. God could easily get stuck like we do, but we serve a God that seems to have this quality that I can only aspire to have. I've created this term on purpose. God has this unstuckability quality. There have been so many times that I think God should be stuck like me, but God simply puts grace and love above all and makes room for all of us to always come back, even with our daddy issues. God chooses us even when we don't choose God. I've heard many people preach that and say that the youngest son abused or disrespected the father by asking for his inheritance early. Remember, the father said yes. And I'm just pretty sure that the father knew that the son had no intentions of staying home once he got it. But he said yes. And it made me think of the God we serve. There have been many times that God has allowed us to make our own decisions, and we've made some really good ones, some really bad ones. I know without a shadow of a doubt, God allowed me to make some really poor decisions and knew that I would fall flat on my face and was just waiting for me to come back. That's the God we serve. See, God doesn't control us like robots, but instead gives us free will to be and to do, with hopes that we will do and be the people of God. I don't know many in the room that do not like the thought of being God's people. But if you're like me, sometimes I don't want to do the necessary work. I'd rather negotiate some of the terms. Well, God, I'll be nice to them, but I need them to at least act like they like me. That's probably not you. I'm just talking about me. God, I'll help them, but you've got to prove that they really, really need the help, even though it would not even change my life to offer them the help. Sometimes, God, I just want it to be on my terms. Even though you know so much better than I do. There's a Kenyan actress by the name of Lupita Nyong'o who received the 2014 Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for her role in 12 Years a Slave. She offered this moving reflection as a part of her acceptance speech. I remember a time when I too felt unbeautiful. I put on the television and only saw pale skin. I got teased and taunted for my night-shaded skin. And my one prayer to God, the miracle worker, was that I would wake up lighter-skinned. But every day I experienced the same disappointment of being just as dark as I had been the day before. I tried to negotiate with God. I told him I would stop stealing sugar cubes at night if he gave me what I wanted. I would listen to my mother's every word and never lose my school sweater again if he just made me a little lighter. But I guess God was unimpressed with my bargaining chips because he never listened. And when I was a teenager, my self-hate grew worse. My mother reminded me often that she thought that I was beautiful, but that was no consolation. She was my mom. She's supposed to think I'm beautiful. And my mother again would say to me, "You can't eat beauty. It doesn't feed you." And these words plagued me and bothered me until finally I realized that beauty was not a thing that I could acquire or consume. It was something that I just had to be. What my mother meant when she said you can't eat beauty was that you can't rely on how you look to sustain you. As I heard these words, it's not something that you can acquire or consume. It's something that you just have to be. It made me think of forgiveness. Because see, forgiving is challenging. If you accidentally step on my foot, I'm good. But if you look for me to come to purposely step on my foot, excuse me, it's going to take a while. But is that how forgiveness works? In my terms? You see, I want to be able to get to the place where I have what I want to believe is the forgiveness gene. I want it to be infused in my DNA. You see, the doctors have been drawing blood from me lately, and I want it to be when they call me back, they look at the panels and say, Pia, you too have that unstickability gene. Yes, I do realize I keep creating these words that aren't real, but I hope that you understand that it's something that I long to have. I want to be like my capital D daddy. It's something when grace and love can supersede everything else. I can't fully explain it. I can't fully put it in words, but I surely embrace it, and I sit in gratitude when I feel it, and I long to every day of my life to share it. You see, Lapita's mom said beauty cannot sustain you, and I would agree because she was stuck in her feelings, as the young folks would say today. And our feelings can't sustain us either. They shift and they shake like the wind at times. Now, they're real, and they need to be acknowledged. But we serve a God that's real. We serve a God that needs to be acknowledged in all things. Maybe you, like me through the years, have struggled with daddy issues with a capital D. I hope and pray that you know that God is never far away. God is right beside you as you turn. God is hovering over you as you go. God is like the prodigal son's father, awaiting from the distance with open arms, ready to welcome you and celebrate you as you come home. Daddy issues will not prevent you from entering in. Just come home. When Tommy and I were talking about this text the past week. He's preaching it downstairs in the non-traditional. He said, Pia, look up the word prodigal. I'll be the first to admit I don't know the entire English language. But they're words that I think I know. There are two definitions. The first one reads, spending money or resources freely and recklessly, wastefully, extravagant. That reminds us of the prodigal son. The second definition is having or giving something on a lavish scale. That describes our God. We serve a loving, merciful, grace-giving God. And like we're not robots, neither is our God. God doesn't always perform as we'd like, but God is always with us, and God is always for us. And God is so much bigger than any daddy issue that we can have. Amen?